So it looks like we have to manually upload the phasor slides to Meetecho because they were proposed after the meeting started, and at least I cannot see anymore the button for refreshing on the data tracker.
Oh, this is so stupid. You cannot unmute while you have a modal dialog open. I see them in the data tracker meeting materials.
Yeah.
So if I import them, they are in the decks ready to be shared.
Now they are.
Yeah, you actually have to click them from the data tracker meeting materials to the decks ready to be shared.
Yeah, there I cannot see any button to force the import again. I used to see it, but not now.
Well, there are two circular arrows. You need to press that to refresh from the
I
web
remember that button. I cannot see it anymore now. Strange.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
So
same
that
browser.
Yeah, I was in another meeting. I think it was ACE, where somebody didn't have the permissions he should have had.
Yeah, I was about to drag and drop the PDF on the upload tab, but thanks, Carsten. It worked.
Okay. So can you do a screenshot of the slide manager so we can send them to?
Of course. There it is.
Thanks, Christian.
I haven't read the chat yet.
So I'll quickly get some coffee.
So we start in a couple of minutes. So Carsten, just say when you think we can start.
I think we can start. Sorry,
Okay.
I tried first.
Just no problem.
Saying.
And hi, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to the interim meeting of the co-working group. I am Marco Tilka. My co-chairs are Jaime Jimenez and Carsten Bormann. And as usual, a reminder, this is an official IETF meeting, so the not well applies. get familiar with that if you're not already. It's not just about IPR, it's also and especially about our code of conduct. So please be nice and professional with one another. The link to the notes is in the chat. I'll try to take notes. Any help is appreciated. Thanks very much, Christian. And there's, I guess, a request for agenda bashing that we were also discussing before starting. Joran has to leave at past. So if it works, especially for Marco, we may want to swap the two agenda items and start with OSCORE capable proxies. Does it work for you, Marco?
Yeah, that's all okay for me.
Thank you. That said, then it's Ricard's turn.
Yes, then I will start. Let's see here. Right.
Thank you.
Well, hello, everyone. So I'd like to present some recent updates to this draft of OSCORE capable proxies. And let's take it away, yeah. So just to recap what this is about, it's about the fact that you can have a core proxy between a client and server, which sounds straightforward. However, you may want a security association between the client and proxy, for instance, for identifying the client and knowing that it's authorized to use this proxy. And a good use case there can be to utilize OSCORE between the client and proxy. And this can be used also, like basically you can have end-to-end OSCORE between the client and server. And in addition to that, you can have OSCORE between the client and proxy. Or you can simply have OSCORE between the client and proxy and maybe it's plain co-op between the client and server. But the problem is that having using OSCORE towards a proxy is not defined and admitted in OSCORE because in OSCORE in the RFC, only CNS are considered to be the OSCORE endpoints. And in addition to this, it's also forbidden to double protect a message. So if you would like to have OSCORE between client and server and client and proxy, meaning 2 layers of OSCORE protection between the client and proxy, that is simply not allowed in the OSCORE RFC. The work in this draft actually started as an appendix in the GroupCom proxy document, and it was agreed during the IETF 110 meeting and also during the core interim that took place in June 2021, that it makes sense to split that work from the appendix where it was into this new separate standalone draft. And okay, what about use cases? And these are a number of use cases we also cover in the draft. Just to go over them a bit quick. The first one is that you may want to have co-op group communication with proxies. So basically, you have a co-op group and you're communicating there through a proxy. And what can be important here is that the proxy will want to identify the client using a secure association. So as the unicast request comes in from the client, that part can be OSCORE protected. Meanwhile, the entire exchange end-to-end from client to servers is protected with group OSCORE. Another example is from the Observe Multicast Notifications draft, where you may want to have a group OSCORE there for end-to-end security. And then you use, the client provides the proxy with this ticket request, which is it has obtained from the server. And this provisioning you may want to protect using OSCORE. 2 other use cases. One is regarding lightweight M2M, and it's stated in the lightweight M2M transport binding specification that you can use OSCORE between a lightweight M2M endpoint and a non-lightweight M2M endpoint via the lightweight M2M server. So as you can see there in the figure, the idea is that the client can interact using OSCORE with the lightweight M2M server, but it may also want to connect to an external application server using the lightweight end-to-end server as a proxy. And also in this case, it's good to have OS core both end-to-end between client and server and between the client and the lightweight end-to-end server, and such because then the lightweight end-to-end server can identify the client, and it's also normal procedure within lightweight end-to-end if you're using OS core that the client and the lightweight end-to-end server will have an OS core security association. And the last use case is one that came from David Navarro, where it's also based on lightweight end-to-end, where you use you have this lightweight end-to-end gateway, and practically in this case, the lightweight end-to-end gateway is acting as a reverse proxy. And again, in this case, you may want to have OS core both between client and the gateway acting as a proxy, and end-to-end between client and server. So what is the contribution of this document? It's a twofold update to the OS core RFC. And the first update being defining the use of OS core in a communication leg where you have a proxy. And this can be both between an origin client or server and the proxy, and also between two proxies, if you have multiple proxies between the client and server. And basically, this means that not only origin client and servers can be OS core endpoints, but also intermediary devices. The second update then is to explicitly allow this nested OS core protection, which we term OS core in OS core. So essentially, the client will first protect using OS core end-to-end, client and server, and then it will again protect using OS core, this time between the client and proxy. And normally, you would have at most two OS core layers, one end-to-end and one between each hop in the communication chain. However, it's possible to apply more than two layers of OS core. And this is also something we explore in Appendix B, talking about this OS core protected onion forwarding. The focus on the document is about OS core, but the same information and rules still applies as is to group OS core. So what have we done recently? We presented version 4 in a core interim in September last year. We also submitted version 5 and 6 around IETF 116. Another one update we did there was to explicitly mention that the proxy should check whether forwarding a decrypted request is okay, which was, of course, the intent, because the intent is that the proxy should decrypt the OS core request and then use that to identify which client sent it and then understand if this is acceptable to forward or not. It was just not explicitly stated, but thanks to Christian's input, we have now clarified that. And we have also clarified one corner case where the proxy should not forward a valid request, which can, for instance, happen if the request is using this listen to multicast notifications option. And you can see more details in the draft regarding that. So now we have this figure here. So this is basically a flow chart of how, what steps do you take when processing an incoming request. And this, of course, we also have in textual form in the document. Just as a high-level overview, you can see that you enter in this blue box and you start by checking if there are any proxy-related options. And you may end up there in the bottom left, acting as a reverse proxy. And you may also end up acting as a forward proxy. And yeah, I don't think I need to go into tell you each step and each box, but one thing to note here is this new purple arrow, and that's is forwarding this request an authorized operation. So that's the explicit check we added based on the feedback from Christian. And you can see you may end up in a 401, or you may end up in the proxy consuming the proxy-related options and forwarding. You may also end up, if there are no proxy-related options at all, then basically it can either have an OS core option, in which case you should decrypt, or, well, if it doesn't have any OS core option, you deliver it to application. And the important thing here is that this is like an iterative process. So if you have come, I guess you can't really see my mouse, unfortunately, but if you have come to the right-hand side and you have decrypted a request, you see this blue line going back to the beginning again. So this is basically like for each OSCORE layer, you go through these steps. And if you decrypt one layer, well, you come back to the blue box again and start over. And eventually you will end up either giving this request to the application, or it's some kind of error, or if you're a proxy, you forward it. So other recent updates we did some clarifications regarding protection of co-op options, because we have this rule set in the document describing how you should protect options, and we weren't too explicit previously about class I or especially class I options. So we clarified that a bit and improved those rules on when a option should be protected or not. So basically the idea is that, okay, you have of course, if the option is class E, yes, you should protect it. But what if the option is class U or I? Well, then we have this defined rule set that will help you determine if you should protect this option, regardless if it's class U or I. The intent here is to protect the options, as many options as possible. So now we're covering better the class I options and some corner cases. And one good check there was the request hash option, because that's actually processed as a class I in responses, although it's expected to not be included in the responses. But you can send it on the wire. So yes, we basically thought about a number of options and went through the rules to see that the rules are consistent with our intentions. And the current rule formulation you can see in section 3.1, covering 3 main cases. And we have multiple examples for each case. And again, the rationale is to encrypt as many options as possible. And then we can go to this figure that actually shows the rules in a graphical way. And again, I don't have to go each box for you, but basically the overall idea here is that, okay, I have an outgoing message. It has a co-op option. How should I process this co-op option? Should I protect it or should I not protect it? And then you can follow this flow chart to understand whether you should or should not protect the option. And again, the idea is to protect it if possible, but of course, sometimes you can't protect it. For instance, if it's needed to actually perform the decryption, such as like the ad hoc option or the OSCORE option itself, you cannot really protect that for the origin server, although the intermediate proxies may be able to protect an OSCORE option that is actually not intended for them. And this is the graphical representation. We also have this in text in the draft. And continuing on, some other recent updates. We have a section 5 now giving guidelines on establishing OSCORE security contexts. So, normally this procedure, what we're describing in the draft, is agnostic of how you established the OSCORE security context you're using. But we have some guidelines still in this section. So for instance, if you're using OSCORE, you may want to run ad hoc, take advantage of ad hoc, and first execute ad hoc with the proxy, and then with the origin server. So you can actually dynamically build your OSCORE context to use with the proxy and server. And we also refer to the optimized workflow that's detailed in a separate draft, where you combine ad hoc message 3 and the first OSCORE protected request. For group OSCORE, you're expected to use a group manager, and thus the client and servers are expected to already have OSCORE security context present. One note there is that if you have proxies in the chain, the proxies should not be in the same group as the origin endpoints for security reasons. Further updates, we rewrite some of the notation, because when we have this nested protection and multiple layers of OSCORE, it can be a bit tricky to express that in a clear and good way. But we have now improved that, so it's easier to see what's actually encrypted and which OSCORE security context is used. We also have an example now with the message flow between when we're actually taking advantage of the adhoc plus OSCO request, the optimized request, comparing that to a vanilla adhoc use case. You can see this in Appendix A5, where we're using adhoc both between the client and proxy and between client and server, of course, through the proxy. So we wanted to compare here, how many messages does it take if you just use vanilla adhoc? How many messages does it take if you use the adhoc plus OSCO optimized workflow? And it's actually quite a large improvement, larger than you may expect. So without optimization, it takes 16 messages. And if you take advantage of the optimization, you come down to only 10 messages. And that's because you can efficiently combine adhoc message 3 and the first OSCO request. And you also get kind of a added benefit because this becomes nested. So to come to some open points, this is open point number 1. We currently have this Appendix B talking about OSCO protected onion forwarding, where the origin client will first protect the request for the origin server, and then you protect for the last proxy in the chain, then the second from last proxy in the chain, etc., until you come to the first proxy. So here you can really nest a number of layers of OSCO protection, which could become something similar to Tor, but using OSCO. So in a high level, the draft itself allows for this use case. So if you follow these rules for message processing and the rules for how you should protect options, it all works out, even if you have more than 2 layers of OSCO protection. Christian, you wanted to jump in with something?
So from my point of view, it would make sense to remove that. Yeah. If we manage to put it into another document, that might be an informative forward reference to work in progress that could use it. Otherwise, yeah, having it there just encourages that it would be implemented based on that without being properly thought through.
Yeah, and that's exactly the concrete question here is the foundation. It looks promising, but of course there's more details and let's say work needed to actually enable like an actual similar functionality to Tor. So what we propose is then to simply remove Appendix B from the current draft and instead reuse that content for a separate experimental draft building on the current one. So we start with Appendix B, but we have to expand that. Yes, Karsten?
So when you say some work is needed, does that mean that some work is needed on Appendix B or some work is needed on the main document to make sure Appendix B works?
No, I mean on Appendix B. So the main document should allow for this nest X amount of OSCO layers. So what is needed is work on Appendix B to enable this Tor equivalent, but using OSCO. Yes.
So I think that I mean, if people are interested in running an experiment based on Appendix B, then I think we could do an interesting experimental protocol here. So that would be one way to process Appendix B, but of course that requires people who actually want to participate in that experiment. But I think it's really a good idea to work a little bit on this Appendix B to really make sure that we are not missing anything in the main document that would enable that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. If we split this out into an experimental draft, of course, we can also rethink just to make 100% sure that nothing in the main document is lacking, which we haven't found so far. And like you said, then it would be great if people are interested. Of course, we ourselves are interested in implementing and testing this. But of course, it's interesting if we have more people involved.
Great.
Yeah, I saw some comment in the chat also from ESCO. Yeah, I carry on. So open point number 2. This is about while we were working on this revision of the rules for protecting options, it put some light on RFC 8798. So for the hop limit option, currently no OSCO processing or class is defined. So that made us think what that means in practice. And actually, if you check the OSCO RFC in section 4.1, it says clearly that Options that are unknown or for which OSCORE processing is not defined shall be processed as class E, meaning that the hop limit option, since it doesn't have any class defined, should be treated as class E by OSCORE, which means that if an origin client adds such an option to a request, it would have to be encrypted as things are today. But that is not really desirable, because then none of the intermediate proxies would be able to read or take advantage of that option. And you may actually end up having an inner and outer option, because the inner one is client to server, and then the proxies start adding outer ones. Christian?
Given that the hop limit is kind of exposing the hop limit would have privacy implications, especially because the proxy would otherwise hide the clients, I think it does make sense to treat it as class E, because it will be class E, like it will be class E for reverse proxies or for whomever this message is encrypted to. It could also be added on the outside, but that would probably happen by proxies that are adding it. So I think that clients setting the option would be a rather rare situation, like if they want to trace route through their proxies. Otherwise, the first proxy along the path will add that, and that probably makes sense when the proxy does this on whichever layer it can. So or on the like most protected layer it can. So if the proxy is participating in, if there is nested OSCORE, then the proxy would add that to its forward proxy. And if the proxy is unprotected, then it adds it unprotected anyway. Of course, this means that you can that the total limit would be different than the set number, but it would still be in the right order of magnitude. So some hop limit option would decrease passing through each proxy. Whether that's an inner or an outer option.
It's just, I see what you're saying. Indeed, it probably would be a rare case that it's a client adding the option. It's just that it's a bit of it becomes, in a sense, not useful, because it will only be between client and server. Just let me continue on a bit, because what we actually want to, the situation we desire here is that if, as we propose, we define this as class U, the hop limit option as class U, in this draft I'm talking about, then what would actually happen is, for the protection rules that workflow was showing earlier, it would end up such that the option is unprotected end-to-end, but it will be protected for the next proxy. So even if it's class U, if you apply this, the rule set for how to handle class U and I options, you would actually end up protecting it between the, let's say, the hops, not end-to-end, but between each individual hop. So I think that would actually might end up in a way like you were desiring it to end up, Christian. But
it might make sense to think through that with examples and.
Yeah, when looking at this, we thought it wouldn't really change much in terms of counting the hops still allowed. It's more about avoiding having an inner option that doesn't really help or contribute, but it's just introducing overhead.
Yeah, that was the intent, right? And if you then apply the rule set for option protection, you would end up protecting the option for the next proxy in the chain, and the proxies can protect the option between each other. But we can think about that a bit more and also produce some kind of examples, considering the situation today and considering the situation if we perform this change. Yeah, I continue to the next slide. So summary and next steps. Just to summarize, this document means an update to the OSCORE RFC to define the use of OSCORE in a communication leg, including a proxy. And we also explicitly admit nested OSCORE protection, OSCORE and OSCORE, which is explicitly not allowed in the current text of the OSCORE RFC. So what are our next steps? Well, we want to submit version 7 before the cutoff. We want to add some of the newly identified use cases, including the EST OSCORE and this co-op PM. We also want to cover a high-level use of the SHIC header compression, which is also related to documents RFC 8824 and now this SHIC 8824 update document. And this will basically describe, like, well, in a high level, how should you apply the SHIC header compression if you're actually doing the nested OSCORE protection. We want to have some better figures to show this flow of what steps should you take when you process an incoming request. We would also like to address the 2 raised open points, but of course considering the feedback from today, and also do some minor editorial fixes. And yeah, we believe that version 7 should be ready for a working group adoption call. And the core mechanics are stable, and of course, yeah, any feedback or comments are very much welcome. Yeah, that was it. So thank you. Yeah, Christian. I'm not hearing anything if someone's speaking.
Your radio is off, Christian.
Sorry, I hit the wrong unmute button. You mentioned that there is an added should when it comes to the proxy being part of the group communication.
Yes.
Are there any worse implications than the obvious of, yep, that proxy would be in the group without needing to? I mean, if there is no need to add the proxy there, yeah, it won't be added. But isn't there any harm that comes of it if the proxy is part of the group?
Yeah, to rethink what we were discussing about that, I think the issue identified was that if the proxy is part of the group, it will have access to the security material that actually the server and client are using. So you kind of get a reduced security level due to that.
Yeah,
that was the main issue.
Okay, but it sounded to me like there would be any worse effect, because of course you only let members into the group that are necessary, but if it so happens that the proxy has a set relevant role there, that would be fine, right?
Christian, based also on what you wrote in the note, I think you're right. You wouldn't be worse than that. And that may be acceptable in a group where, I don't know, some group members are assumed to work even as proxies. So maybe we can change that should to be just a factual statement. If proxies happen to be members of that same group, well, they'll be just other group members and they boil down to the same security model used in the group. What do you think?
Maybe along the lines of, from just for the purpose of this document, there is no reason to add the proxy to the group.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't see this comment you're talking about. I guess it's in the minutes, but maybe it's too strictly as to say that the proxy must not be in the same group. We can maybe say what would they, okay, like you said, Christian, for this draft, there's no, we're not requiring that. And maybe we can mention the security implications of if the proxy is a member of the same group.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, sounds good.
Any more comments or questions on this document? And nothing more in the chat. So I think we are done with this. Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, thank you.
And next is Marco with Phaser.
Okay, so, are you sharing the slides for me, or should I?
You can request sharing with the...
Okay.
There you go. Okay, this is taking a while. Okay, you're in control.
Okay. All right. So this is the Phasor retransmission timeout and congestion control, which has currently the 02 that was submitted in March this year. And maybe I give a quick recap of the Phasor, because it's been a long time before this has been discussed in the core working group. So the Phasor is a retransmission timeout and congestion control mechanisms for co-op, and it tries to find a good middle ground when we are operating in an environment there are random losses, and of course congestion may happen. So it tries to improve the recovery efficiency in case of random loss, but still handles congestion safely, in particular including the unnecessary retransmits. And it is optional to implement in co-op. It replaces, and if implemented, then it replaces the default retransmission timeout and congestion control algorithms as specified in 7252. The Phasor has two ways to calculate RTO. So we call the first one fast RTO. So that is a normal RTO. So it's basically the same as TCP usage. So what's specified in RFC 6298. The round trip time computation and RTO computation. There is a slight modification for the initialization, but that's not a big difference. But then we have an alternative way to calculate retransmission time that we call slow RTO. So it's measured as a time elapsed from the original transmission all the way, including all retransmissions, until the acknowledgement arrives. So the picture shows there the original retransmission, and if we don't get the acknowledgement, then the retransmission timeout expires. And if we still don't have the acknowledgement, then the RTO is backed off. So there is a binary exponential back off. RTO expires again, and we retransmit and so on, until in this figure we retransmit 3 times, and then finally the acknowledgement arrives, and we measure all this time from the original transmission, and then we multiply this by a factor of 1.5. So it's exponential in that sense as well. All right, and then we have also a 3-state RTO logic, each of these 3 states having their own back-off C area. So the fast state, the fast slow state, and then the slow state. So the fast state is the normal state that we are operating. But if there is no acknowledgement arriving and we need to retransmit, then we calculate just like the TCP, the fast RTO and retransmit, and we have the normal binary exponential backoff, just like TCP does. And then for the next message, we move on then to the fast slow state, so this yellow state, because there was retransmission. If there are no retransmissions, then we stay there in the fast state. And in this fast slow state, we, in order to make the RTO mechanism efficient in case of random loss or wireless losses, which is the typical environment, we first apply the fast RTO. But if that's not successful, then we apply the slow RTO, so the much longer RTO, and that is to ensure that any unnecessary retransmissions that are ongoing there, they will kind of go away. And then then we continue if still not successful with this fast RTO, but following the normal binary exponential back-off logic. And as said, this fast slow state, it is a single shot state. So if we enter there, next if there are no retransmission needed, we go back to the fast state. But if retransmissions are needed there in the fast slow state, then it's quite likely that there is congestion, and then we move on to the slow state, where we always first apply this slow RTO, so very long RTO, to ensure that any congestion and unnecessary retransmissions have time enough to kind of to leave the network, and then after that we kind of follow this same logic as the TCP with the binary, the RTO as calculated in TCP and with the binary exponential back-off. Okay, so this is the basic logic that how it operates, and let's move on then to the current status. So first of all, the Fazor was first the 00 as after adapted as a working group document. It was submitted in March 2020, and it addressed the feedback from Christer regarding the retransmission count option. And then in October 2020, we submitted the 01. It clarified further some of the issues, including the retransmission count value, how it is used. We did some editorial changes, and the authors considered at that time that we could be pretty close to the pretty ready for the working group last call, and we asked for more reviews, including from the transport area, and we got a thorough review by Carls and also the DSVR early review by Yoshi, but then the document went dormant for a long period of time due to many reasons, COVID being the one of those. There are no cycles for the photos to work on it, but we revived it this spring and submitted in March the version 02, and the authors think that it now addresses the points raised by the reviews. So the points that Carls raised, they were mainly kind of asking for clarifications and better use of the terminology and so on. And the DSVR early review also asked us to clarify some points. I have replied to Yoshi, and I think Yoshi, we agree with Yoshi that everything that he commented is okay. But what Yoshi wanted us to do is to add more explanation and justification for the Fazor back-off series logic. So what is the kind of a logic behind there, and what is the justification why it can be a little slightly more aggressive than the TCP RTO mechanisms. And the idea is that we will submit the 03. I cannot promise when, but hopefully by the next IETF meeting, and we'll add this what Yoshi asked. But at the same time, of course, we would like to have even more reviews and feedback if only possible. And we hope that that once we have submitted the next version, then we maybe are ready for the working group last call. Okay, I guess that's all I have.
So I have two questions. One quick question. I tried to understand the pseudocode in Appendix A, and I kind of failed because this is not a notation that I'm very familiar with. Can you write in the document what this is related to, this notation that you're using there?
So, wait a second. For a long time I have taken a look at the appendix. Oh, it's
Yeah.
a pseudocode. Now I don't recall. I should. Yeah, this is Ilvo wrote this, and now I'm sorry I don't have the direct answer for you.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
could you elaborate a bit? What was the problem with the pseudocode?
Well, there is some use of variables which suddenly are written in brackets and so on that I really couldn't quite get from this. Maybe if I had spent more time, I would have got this, but maybe just pointing what ecosystem, what role models were used for writing this pseudocode. Alternatively, maybe making it a little bit more Python-like or something that people are used to use might really help. I'm also not sure that this is even mentioned in the document. So maybe
Yeah. Right.
maybe having a little bit of text in the main document that points to this would be useful, and maybe a little bit of explanation would also be useful.
Yeah. That's a good point. I haven't thought about that. This was something we added then in 0.1 at some later phases, if I recall it correctly. So yeah, but sorry, I don't remember what was the what the Ilpo used for this. But we will add, of course, the some explanation there.
Yeah, I think the pseudocode is really useful, so we don't get the same kind of confusion we had in Coco about which run of the mechanism is something going into and so on. So having some pseudocode that people can follow it would be really useful. My other question is, given that we have had a 2.5 year hole here, who of the authors are actually still active on this draft?
Could you repeat this? Who are the?
There are 4 authors on the draft,
right? Yeah.
And I'm just wondering who's going to bring the energy to follow this through to completion.
I believe it's pretty much me myself, and Ilpo is hopefully able to help a bit. So we too are expected to work on it.
So maybe you can discuss with the other people who are currently listed as authors whether they want to be listed as contributors. So it's clear who actually are the people we want to talk to, and who should rightly be acknowledged, but are not current authors.
Right. Well, there are of course all the authors have been involved in the work.
Yes.
Work at the time when this was developed. So maybe they deserve to be as the authors, even though they probably are not able to put the cycles to finish this up. But unless there is something that I'm missing.
Yeah, we have this tension in the IETF between the concept of an author that we academics are used to, and the concept of an author that is used in the working group organization according to RFC 2418. And I'm always having a hard time to position myself on this tangent. I just want to point out that after 2.5 years, maybe it's time to revisit this. And if your conclusion is no change, I'm totally fine with that. But maybe have a look at who's still around and who should be mentioned as a contributor.
Yeah, of course we will be in contact and
Great.
And we'll discuss that. Yeah, thanks.
Christian?
Yeah, I have a question that is not directly related to, I don't know whether it's related to the document. So this is changing things about the retransmission. As I understand from the document, it doesn't change anything about end start, so the number of requests that can be open at the same time. Is this something that there might be further work on, or is this something that is completely orthogonal to this topic?
I think we haven't considered, I think it's out of scope of this document, because this purely touches the RTO mechanism. Also the default RTO mechanism in co-op, it doesn't have any RTO measurement and RTT and RTO computation, and it only has this the back of logic, and this kind of the fuzzer back of logic is intended to kind of replace, if implemented, then it replaces the back of logic, and of course adds the RTO calculation as specified in this document. No other changes, to my understanding, are needed.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Any more comments or questions? Yeah, I have a question suggestion. And there's a recently adopted document in core, co-op PM. It's basically defining an option for doing performance measurement, including measurement of round trip time. So I was wondering if the use of that method can complement yours to have a more accurate round trip time estimation in addition to what you're doing already, or if in your case doesn't add anything, but still I'd like to understand better and to document possibly even how you can benefit of that, how it relates to Phasor.
Okay, yeah, I haven't been unfortunately I haven't been able to follow core for a while, so I need to take a look at that and in order to be able to answer the question. So
yeah, and I don't know the answer myself. Just saying it's something clearly related. So I think you should say if, well, that option is not really helping you because you have your own way and it's fine and stable for what you want to do, or if it helps you as a complement, and then, well, how you can integrate it into your big machine.
Yeah, I think I need to take a look at that and then see what is the if it's something that possibly could be even integrated or used as a alternative for or kind of some kind of a modified way compared to what the document currently specifies.
It's for sure a possible additional source of information in terms of round trip time. Then I don't know how well it fits is useful to you, but I think we should understand what the case is here.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'll take a look at that then.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it may be interesting to look at the specific configurations and traffic profiles and so on, where this PM document actually adds something to your mechanisms, and there may be other configurations like very infrequent traffic where maybe it doesn't add very much. So it's maybe useful to think about the main area of application of that document.
Okay.
I just mentioned the document in the minutes, and well, for convenience, I can paste it in the chat as well, but here we or co-op PM. Okay, thank you, Marco. If there's no more comments or question on Phasor, I think we can move on to the last part of the meeting, the any other business, and there were 2 points added by ESCO.
Takes
That's right.
Can I quickly ask, Marco, you said there will be a -03 and that maybe will not be next week. But what's your timeline you have in mind for that?
We haven't the exact timeline yet. It depends on the so for sure not within one or 2 weeks, but maybe in early July.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, hopefully. No promises, but hopefully.
Thank you.
Okay, that's for ESCO now. Just going to release the slides.
Yeah, actually, I don't have any slides there. I did put up a link to the mail question that came in, basically. So I thought it was an interesting question to discuss in a meeting to see if we can do anything with that. So I don't know, Marco, do you have that mail or that link that you can show it on screen, or should I do the sharing?
If it's handy for you, please go ahead. Otherwise, I can share.
Okay, well, maybe you do it because more
Okay.
experience with it. I always keep looking for the right buttons here, but
No problem.
this goes quicker.
Yes.
Yeah, an interesting question that was posted to the working group. So formal request of an informational draft on conditional attributes to be an official IETF standard. Yeah, and then it says, okay, it's used in the lightweight M2M protocol. Yeah, for me, first of all, it's maybe not that clear. Maybe the question could be, okay, why would it need to be an official IETF standard? If it's informational, you can actually use it also in other standards. So what would be the benefit of making it standards track document, for example, versus an informational document? And the other part, well, suppose there is a benefit in that, then maybe the question is how would something like that happen? So yeah, if it needs to be kind of resubmitted and reviewed to make it standards track, then there is a chance that even the standard document itself might change because of review, etc. And that also serves no purpose then, if at least for a standard that's already using it. It wants to use that version and not some different version from the original standard. So I just wondered if anyone had some thoughts about that.
So I cannot see Miteco right now. I don't know if Karsten, you wanted to say something first.
Yeah, so we have been dithering backwards and forwards on this for a while, and I think that in the end we said we don't necessarily need it as a standards track document. We are just documenting one way of doing things. So for us as the core working group, it's good enough to have this as an informational document. But I think the feedback we get from OMA here is that they are considering this as a normative reference. And for them, it would be easier to do that if we process this as a standards track document. So the main difference is that we are getting much more detailed and also tedious review by the ISG if we go for that. And of course, there's a reason for that. So if we don't want to have that review, then we go for informational. If we think it's it's justified, and yeah, with the OMA request, I think it is. My view would be that we can go for standards track here, but of course that's something that the working group should decide to do.
Yeah, okay, that's clear. Yeah, if you look at the document, it could certainly be a standards track document, so it can just reserve these particular attributes that are used for the conditional expressions, and there's also lots of requirements written there, like must and should and may, etc. So it could be suitable for that standards tracks, yeah. If the authors, of course, are willing to put up with this extra review.
So we started to open for this at IETF 116, also following a comment from the IUTDIR review. I was wondering, why isn't this standards track? The authors put themselves in a position such that they are agnostic of that. They just want to know what to do. There was someone in the room, I think Matthias, for sure, that was saying already, it'd be better if this is standards track, but let's check if there's more support. And more support came, for example, from OMA. So it's consistent and it makes sense, and the authors are fine with that, by the way. They just wanted to have a clear direction.
Okay.
So we can reconfirm at the next meeting, but seems to me we want to do it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, to me that makes sense.
Yeah, and there is already in fact, normative reference to this document in the lightweight end-to-end standard.
Yeah, okay.
But thanks for bringing this up again. This is the kinds of discussions we wanted to have, in fact. Okay, good.
Yes,
More
thanks.
material for Bill.
Do you want to
and we'll have the
answer,
next point.
Marco?
On the next question?
No, actually, somebody should somebody from the chairs then provide an answer to this email, or some. It could be very short, like okay, we will consider it, or or a summary of what we have just discussed. I don't mind, but it would be good to get at least one response to it.
Yes, we can thank first of all and point to the notes of this meeting.
Yeah. Okay.
Does it work for you, Karsten?
Sorry, I dropped out for a second. What is okay for me?
If we reply to HOMA, thanking their feedback and pointing to the notes of this meeting when they are ready.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. Thank you. Okay, then there was one more point.
Yeah. There's also one I added there. So this was on the GroupCom Biz draft. So now has been waiting for a while. So just wondering, okay, what is now the next step? What do we need to do, or do we have an idea of when this is going to move forward? Or maybe something should be updated first, because some time already passed. So you can also apply updates where needed, but so far I didn't hear anything.
As far as I can remember, we are waiting for a follow-up from Karsten on the way we answer this working group plus call review, and we should be receiving also additional editorial comments from John. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is something that the shepherd, who happens to be me, needs to do. And thank you for nagging ESCO. This is well deserved by me, and it needs to go forward.
An additional related thing I can point to, in his recent follow-up comments to GrupoScore, Christian pointed out that the sort of non-traditional responses that we are specifically using in GrupoScore, in a sense, can be seen, and they are, as an example of the non-traditional responses defined in the core responses document, and it's good to give a reference to that. Yes, after some discussion also with the GrupoScore authors, it may be even better to put that reference in Group ComBis, actually, because those sort of non-traditional responses are, in fact, defining Group ComBis. GrupoScore is just defining how to protect those.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I wrote this non-traditional responses document just to make sure that we have a place where we collect what we have discussed about non-traditional responses. Now, is this useful as a document on its own, or is it just something that served its purpose by getting non-traditional responses into various documents? So if it's the former, yeah, let's finish it.
I think it's useful. It's defining a generic concept of which we have different incarnations in different situations. My point about this was just Christian suggesting to give a pointer to that document in GrupoScore. Yeah, we just thought that pointer is more useful to be included in Group ComBis, because that's where that incarnation of non-traditional responses is defined. So that may be one little thing we may want to add in Group ComBis, in fact, just an informational reference to core responses.
Yeah, okay.
Good to know.
Yeah, it should be somewhere in the section that says that multiple responses from the same server can come to the same group request.
Okay, yeah, that sounds useful to reference that as well then.
Yeah. What do you think, Christian, by the way? Because the suggestion came from you, first of all.
Yeah, so I'm at this. So I made the suggestion to look into this, but at the same time, the core responses probably needs a bit work and might also still get changes in the terminology. So it's a bit hard to use from documents like this at the moment.
We don't even have to mention the words non-traditional responses.
Yeah.
We can just say that
You're right.
what we are introducing in Group ComBis is just an example of what is more broadly defined in core responses. That's it, with no names.
So at latest we would need it for the proxying of group requests.
Yes.
So yeah, maybe that's a good indication to put a bit more effort into getting core responses progressed.
So can you send me a little to-do list of things that need to be fixed?
Well, Group ComBis was mostly for the authors. For you, Karsten, I think it was mostly following up on the revision that addressed your working group plus call comments.
Yeah, that was a pretty extensive set of comments, so it's a pretty extensive set to check. No, I was specifically asking about reviving non-traditional responses and putting in the information we have gathered since we wrote this, I don't know how many years ago.
A couple.
So non-traditional responses is doing a bit of two things at the same time. It's both introducing ways of, or it's describing ways of doing them, but it's also describing the concept in general. I think I'm not completely sure we have a rough working group consensus yet on this concept being really the same thing, whether it's group, whether it's observation responses, whether it's multicast responses, etc. I would very much like to gather a bit more feedback from the working group, whether that's really the direction to go to do this unification. I'm very much convinced that it is the right way, but I'm a bit in the void here.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, the
This might
purpose,
be-
of course, was to simply point out that there is a similarity here, and of course we can, our perceptions can differ about the degree of that similarity. So maybe this document doesn't have to present the conclusion that they are similar, but just needs to contain the terminology and discussion.
I think that the tricky part is that OSCORE processing of non-traditional responses cannot work from just description of similarities, because then we wind up in the situation where we still have to normatively specify the handling each time. But OSCORE, the first time the OSCORE processing of some non-traditional response that is not observed is described, at that time we will need something more concrete than just observing similarities. But then we will need to say that any case where the client processes multiple responses can be handled like this or that, or there are these and those distinctions and criteria, but still it needs something solid.
Okay, I'm not sure whether I'm hearing you say that this should be a normative document.
I'm afraid so.
Oh, okay, that's very different from what I had in mind for it. Okay, I think that's an interesting point we can pick up on the mailing list. I haven't looked at this document for half a decade, so let's see what we find.
So irrespective of this, an action for group combis is to add an informative reference to core responses, right? As the document where the general concept comes from, of which we are producing an instance in group combis. And that should be about the comment that came from Christian recently. I'm also typing in the notes. Okay. Thanks a lot, Esko, for raising these.
Yep, thanks.
Any other business to discuss today? If not, thanks a lot for your time. It was a good meeting. Talk to you in 2 weeks.
Yep, see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.